Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, Sunday afternoon, to discuss the events that happened in Harrisburg yesterday. I wanted to give you a brief narrative of what happened and led up to the violence that we experienced in the city and to some of the decisions that were made later in the day. But let me start by saying that I understand why people are upset. I recognize that throughout this country we have a problem with systemic racism, really at all levels of our judicial system, and this is something that has to be debated, discussed, improved upon, and we as a democracy need to take these voices very seriously and listen. And that's exactly what was happening for the first several hours of this protest yesterday. The protest represented really the best of democratic political civic engagement and optimism up through about 3 p.m. The protesters were organized, respectful, and had their voices heard. Then the rally began to wrap up. The final speaker spoke, and people around 3 o'clock, I don't have the exact time, began leaving from the Capitol steps. A lot of the original protesters went home at that point, and some new folks came to join the protesters. And the tone at that point really began to shift. And it was noted as people were going down, going south on 3rd Street down to Walnut, and then past the police station for that time, that the epithets and the anger was at a much different level than it had been earlier in the day. The protesters then turned down Front Street and walked along Front Street toward State Street. Now, Harrisburg police were playing the role of supportive traffic control. They were actually there, not in riot gear, with several vehicles at the intersection of State and Front to help direct traffic and help protect the rioters and the protesters from actually being hit by any oncoming cars. There was a blockade at North Street. There was a blockade of cars coming southbound on Front Street. But the rioters began to push past, and I'm calling them rioters because at this point in time, they descended upon a police car which was parked at the intersection of North and Front Street, and began clamoring around the car, several hundred people. And the officers, who again were not in riot gear, were in plain clothes, were outside of the vehicle and were sort of being pushed by this large crowd of individuals. And at that point, a woman came out of the crowd. It was a white woman with a pole, and smashed the front windshield of the police vehicle. It was vehicle 219 that was parked there at the intersection. And after smashing the vehicle, actually went up to one of our officers and struck our officer in the face. Now, our officers, rather than overreacting at that point, called for backup and support, and slowly began to sort of surround the vehicle and trying to move forward out of the crowd, out of harm's way, and headed towards Forster Street to try to escape what was turning to be an ugly scene. After the woman broke the windshield and assaulted one of the officers, and the officer did not respond with force, then the crowd threw bricks, and the back windshield of the car was shattered, and a number of protesters began descending on the vehicle and not only hurling racial epithets and other types of epithets at the police, but began carving into the police car as it was slowly moving towards Forster Street words like pig and other types of profanities. I brought one picture just to show you the state of 219. You can see the word pig carved here. You can see the back windshield smashed out. Now, there were 6 officers total, 1 in the car, 5 outside of the car, HPD. We had at least some seasoned officers, many of whom I've now spoken to, and they all were terrified and very much scared for their own well-being. But as police officers with the duty to protect and serve, they decided to stay focused and continued to push forward to try and get out of harm's way. As they got closer to the intersection at Forster Street, the Capitol Police arrived. And it's at that time that the Capitol Police began to discharge a degree of pepper spray to encourage the protesters to disperse and allow the police officers to escape from harm's way. But the violence then escalated with bricks being thrown, and one Capitol Police officer was at that time hit in the head by a brick, and two other Harrisburg police vehicles, which were there closer to Forster Street, also had their windows smashed, antennas broken, lights broken and smashed as well. And then the officers continued to sort of proceed to get out of harm's way and eventually made their way back to the Capitol. Chief Carter arrived at that time, and what you began to see was the protesters went up Forster Street. That was the end of the violence. From that point on, the protesters went to the Capitol steps, massed on the Capitol steps, and there was a series of sort of solemn confrontations between the protesters and the police. And at that time, you'll see the police are in riot gear. But you will notice that Commissioner Carter actually stands between the row of the police officers and the individual protesters at that time in an effort, walking back and forth, talking to individual protesters, trying to calm people down, trying to encourage dialogue and discussion. Slowly, the police are pushed back up the Capitol steps. Commissioner Carter continues to try and de-escalate the situation. And it's during these moments that I tweeted yesterday that I was incredibly proud of all of our efforts to de-escalate what could have been a very, very difficult situation. You have the worst hate speech and the worst types of epithets being hurled at the police, and yet the police are not responding at all violently. Then, after the protesting on the steps for a while, the police make their the protesters make their way down 3rd Street to Walnut Street, and reinforcements have come. The state police are there, and basically people gather next at the Harrisburg police station, or near the Harrisburg police station in the intersection with 2nd and Walnut. Again, things could have gotten out of control at that time, but the Harrisburg police, again, continue to show restraint. And I also want to note there are many in the community and others in the crowd that are doing the same thing, trying to calm people down, calm voices down, encourage respectful dialogue and conversation, and to make sure that there's no violence. We get to about 8 o'clock at night, I would say, and there's still a sizable number of protesters there. We have reports of much more violent activity that are happening in other cities, and it's clear that we want to make sure that protesters disperse before nightfall. Commissioner makes the request of me to issue a curfew. We issue a curfew at 9 o'clock, and for that last half hour, the protesters are sort of pushed down towards Riverfront Park and encouraged to disperse. And I'm pleased to report they do disperse at that point in time, and there's no additional violence. That's the narrative of what happened. There's a lot of misinformation out there. When the Capitol Police did respond and were in riot gear and did have pepper spray, that was in an effort to extricate the Harrisburg police officers who had been besieged by the crowd, assaulted by the crowd, and had their vehicle broken and really impacted by the crowd. That is the narrative of events, and we are very happy to talk about other specifics and to answer your questions. But before I do that, I want to let Commissioner Carter speak a little bit. As I say, he was a model of what I would hope every Harrisburg citizen would recognize, which is that the Harrisburg police is committed to peaceful protest and committed to nonviolent resolution of disagreements, and he's a model for this city. Commissioner Carter.
Thank you, Mayor. I first want to offer my condolences to the George Floyd family. I can't breathe either right now. I understand what's going on nationwide. I don't agree with the violence and the burning down of your own cities, your own neighborhoods. That's going to take years and years to build back up, but I do understand it. I would like to say to all of the young people out there, I feel your pain. Yes, we have a history of being treated differently. Me speaking as a black man in this country too. Me at one time, that was a young black man, and I had the same fears that you have right now. But I want to say, that Martin Luther King, he demonstrated peacefully, and things were changed in this country. Malcolm X, things were changed in this country. All of the other leaders, they demonstrated peacefully, some not so peacefully, but things are changed in this country. I think that there is unity with a strong voice. I think that there is unity with the right leadership. State your cause and be persistent about your cause. Register to vote. Voting is the key. The laws come from the legislator, Vote for who you want into office, and please, by all means, people of color and everybody with a good heart, because I cannot discriminate against anybody. Become police officers if you have a passion for justice in this country. What the mayor said is correct. It's unfortunate, that things happened the way that they happened yesterday, but thank God that, to my knowledge, to the best of my knowledge, no one was seriously hurt. I don't believe that anybody was taken to the hospital. I want to say one thing about property crime. When it comes to property crime, if you look at it, you are destroying the property that you pay with for your tax dollars. So those are the vehicles that were destroyed yesterday. 9 times out of 10, your tax dollars will be paying to get them fixed. I myself, I would rather see that money go towards community leadership, go towards schools, education, and beautifying the city. You have the right to protest. You have the right to demonstrate. We will never deny you of your constitutional rights. That is your right. Please utilize that, but utilize that in a wise manner. At this time, I'll have the mayor come back to the podium, and we can discuss, if you have any questions on what happened yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll second those remarks and say Tuesday is indeed Election Day, and I hope people will go out and make their voices heard at the ballot box. All right, Momin, I know we're doing this on Zoom, but who do we have first for a question?
Hi, I was just curious if anyone was arrested in relation to the protest yesterday.
I know that Capitol Police arrested at least one individual after the altercations there at the corner with Forster Street. That's all that was reported to me. That was Capitol Police, not HPD. Any other reports that you know of?
No, sir.
No. So just the one protester at the intersection there at Forster and Front.
Okay, next we'll go to Brett Schultes. Go ahead.
Hello, and first of all, just please confirm that you can hear me.
We can hear you, Brett. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mayor. One thing I keep hearing from black protesters, they're saying there's a double standard, that police treat them differently than they treated the mostly white crowd of armed protesters that came to the Capitol in April, back when the city was still under strict travel restrictions due to the coronavirus. So what would you tell those people? Because I have to say, I've covered both protests, and I see a big difference in the way they're being met by police. And certainly, I understand that this is also a protest where police are being targeted. But please speak to that.
Yeah, let me try and speak to that, because the Harrisburg police were there to ensure the safety of the protesters, to make sure that traffic was controlled in such a way that they were able to have their voices be heard. They were not in riot gear. They were stationed around the protest perimeter in a similar manner to which they had been stationed before for the previous reopened PA rallies. It wasn't until, originally the protesters marched through the city once or twice before it started to wrap up at 3 o'clock, and the tenor changed. So for the first couple hours of this protest, the police were supportive, the interactions were positive. What changed was there were some that were unwilling to leave the protest without inflicting violence. Including this woman who went up to the police car with the pole, smashed the front window, and then punched one of the Harrisburg officers. At that time, The crowd also began throwing bricks, smashing the windows of the car, as I said, carving profanity into the side of the police car, and the police officers were just trying to get out of there and get out of there safely. There were 6 police officers. They were at the corner of North and Front. They hadn't even expected the crowd to continue to Forster. They thought the crowd was going to go back up towards the Capitol on State Street, had it done before. They called for help, backup, and they tried to make their way peacefully from North Street along Front Street up to Forster Street. Despite all that was going on, the carving into the car, the individual who was punched, the profanities and the epithets, the bricks, they were professional and really, I would say, heroic in their response to not be baited by the protesters and not have this escalate into something even worse. They made it all the way to, or close to the way to Forster when they were met with the Capitol Police, who tried to assist. And aside from the exchange of some pepper spray, which occurred at that point, that was it in terms of the violence. There were the 3 cars that were damaged, the Capitol Police officer who was hit in the head with a brick, another Capitol Police officer who injured his hand. But at all times, the police, I think, showed an incredible restraint. And then, when you're on the steps of the Capitol, you again see the protesters with a lot of hate speech and a lot of anger, trying to bait the police, and the police responding simply by backing up and backing up and backing up. That's the type of de-escalation that I was referring to. And you see Commissioner Carter constantly trying to tamp down the violence by engaging in dialogue. I am all for peaceful protest. I believe that hate speech and epithets are not the way to have your voice be heard. And basically, you saw a change in the rally itself, which saw a change in at least the policing gear. But the police were there to assist in this rally, and it would have gone smoothly had there not been some that really wanted to agitate.
Okay, next we have Becky Metrick.
So I have 2 questions. One, it seemed like when it came to state police and some of the other assisting agencies, they had slightly different methods, brought out the mounted police when they were on Walnut and Second. Was there any reason for the different types of methods between Harrisburg Police and some of the other departments that were present?
Well, each of the police has its own methods and its own team, but there was a lot of coordination right from the beginning between all the different agencies. You have the Harrisburg Police, which was mainly doing traffic control. You have the Capitol Police, who are based there at the Capitol, and then you had the state police that were called in once things turned violent. I'll note that other than the violence that we saw at that moment there near the intersection of Front and Forster, from that point on, we were able to de-escalate at all points, and there was no other damage to property or individuals, and people weren't hurt from that point forward. But the state police came at our request and helped preserve the peace.
I noticed, because I was out there yesterday evening, it did appear that there were a couple other times when pepper spray was used. Are you able to give me a tally about how many questions, or sorry, not how many questions, how many times pepper spray had to be used over the course of the day?
The initial use of the pepper spray was from the Capitol Police at that moment when they were trying to extricate the Harrisburg police officers. I believe pepper spray was used a couple other times over the course of the rally. I don't have those details, but we can certainly get them. Partly we haven't had a chance to do a full wrap up of everything that's happened or even interview everyone who was involved, in part because we had another rally today, and everyone worked incredibly long hours yesterday. So as the week unfolds, we'll get more details. But it was a very limited use of pepper spray. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Commissioner can add to that.
Sure.
Ma'am, as far as the resources that came in yesterday, Other agencies responded to a call that I put out. PSP responded to a call that I put out. Anytime you have a demonstration and you want it to be peaceful, you call in horses. At one time, Harrisburg City had horses, but we no longer have horses. I asked PSP if they can bring their horses in. The horses were only brought in to control the crowd, not to incite any sort of frenzy or rioting among the crowd. I want to thank, some people from Harrisburg that de-escalated that I talked to yesterday, that wanted to have a peaceful protest, that were de-escalating other people that were trying to start things. Most of the things that happened in the demonstration yesterday happened from outside sources. It wasn't really Harrisburg people that started things, but you had some younger generation, that got pretty fired up, that tried to get into the fray too. But all in all, I want to congratulate the Harrisburg people on the behavior that they showed yesterday. As far as the pepper spray, as far as the mace, I know a couple of times we deployed it, but was only after there was aggressive actions taken towards us.
Just really quickly for you, Carter. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes, we're still here.
Okay. This was for Carter. I saw him speaking with the protesters as curfew was hitting last night. There were threats at the time for tear gas and other things going on. And I just wanted to hear from him what that process was like of going from this very tense moment of threats of tear gas and the police with gas masks on to then letting the protesters sort of peacefully disperse on their own.
Yeah, I'll say we're very fortunate that we have the commissioner. He was absolutely committed to making sure that the protesters would get home safely, and I think can tell you about his thought process.
If I could answer your question, ma'am. Every police officer down there yesterday showed tremendous restraint. Yes, the gas masks were deployed yesterday. My concern was, and I talked to Captain Kashiba from Lower Paxton, Chief Kashiba from Lower Paxton Township. I talked to the elected sheriff from Dauphin County, Shemente, and, we agreed that we didn't want nightfall to come and that, we were in the same situation, in the same holding pattern, because that's when people tend to get injured. That's when bad things start to happen. Bottles and bricks were already being thrown at us. So we just wanted to disperse the crowd. At no time were we going to deploy any of the tear gas or anything like that. We just wanted to get inside the protesters here to have them leave peacefully. So yes, there was a show of force down there. There was a conversation, but at no time were we going to do that. It wasn't going to happen.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, other questions?
Okay, next question. We have a caller, your number ending in 2567. I'll unmute you now.
Hi, Mayor. This is Karina with CBS 21 News. Thank you for speaking with us today. I just wanted to ask how many officers were involved with the car on Front Street that were surrounded by the folks that were rallying, and what is being done for their mental health? As you said, that was a very scary moment for people, for your officers that were involved there.
So there were 6 Harrisburg police officers that were surrounded by a crowd of hundreds of folks that were turning violent at that moment. They were literally pushing in on the officers, 5 of whom were outside of the vehicle, 1 of whom was inside the vehicle, in such a way that they couldn't very easily move. They believe, because I've spoken to several of them, they believe that they helped avert a tremendous amount of violence and are proud of the fact that they did not become baited by the protesters. So imagine having your vehicle smashed by a pole, having one of your officers being punched in the face, seeing people carving into your vehicle with knives, and having bricks thrown at your vehicle. And I'll just note for the record, there aren't any bricks on this section of Front Street. So to the extent that they're bricks that people have brought with them. So at that moment, rather than be baited, fight back, or do something which would escalate the situation, they determined in solidarity to quietly and peacefully try and move forward and get out of harm's way. And that's what they did from North Street all the way down to Forster Street when they were met by the Capitol Police that were coming to help reinforce them. Their actions, I believe, were brave and courageous and averted additional violence, and were part of a whole series of de-escalating actions which HPG took over the course of the entire rest of the protest, leading up, as you say, or the previous questioner said, to Chief Carter at the eve of the curfew, pleading for people to go home peacefully rather than to be dispersed through some other means. And they're very proud of their actions. I told you I've spoken to them, and I feel that they felt they were scared, but at no point did they lose perspective on what their job was, and their job was to protect the city and the people of this city and the protesters and everyone from violence, and it was to try and simply get out of harm's way was their goal without adding any fuel to the fire. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering about their mental health, because that is a very tough situation to be in, and something that I'm sure is scary to go through.
It is difficult. It's a difficult job being a police officer. It's very, very hard to imagine oneself in that situation. We have the ability to offer them support, psychological and otherwise, on the job. That's something we do routinely for all of our officers. But I would say they felt proud of the way they conducted themselves, and justifiably so at this point, because I think we were able to avert a lot worse violence. There were definitely agitators in that crowd, not from Harrisburg and not affiliated with Black Lives Matter, for that matter, who were out for violence. I can tell you that at the same time that they were smashing the window of the police car, they were also inserting an anarchist pamphlet into one of the cars, which we have. And as I said, somebody brought bricks along to do the damage. There were some in the crowd that did not want to go home after a peaceful protest, but those were not from Harrisburg. And when Commissioner Carter talks about being proud of the residents of Harrisburg, I am as well, because those first 2 hours of that protest and everyone in Harrisburg gathered, made their voices heard peacefully, and then it was others, outside agitators, who basically turned things violent. And I'll refer everyone to an interesting op-ed in the paper from the head of the local NAACP, Reverend Allen, who also supports that interpretation.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
Yep.
Okay, next question is from Brett. Brett, I'll unmute you here.
What I'm hearing is this situation where everything was peaceful, everything was going well, and then this white woman attacked this police vehicle, and then some bricks were thrown. And that's really the rationale that you're putting forth for why police showed up in riot gear, and from then on did some pepper spray, and there was escalation. So what I want to ask is, who was that white woman? Were charges filed? And I expect to get to learn more about that, and know her name, and learn more about this situation, because it sounds like that's being used here, perhaps justifiably, as the reason why police escalated their own actions at a time when we know that people are targeting their anger towards police broadly, and that further escalation could expect to evoke, because I didn't see any bottles thrown myself until I saw police in riot gear. So I'm wondering when we're going to expect to see that woman's criminal charges filed.
Okay, well, one of the things that we have now in Harrisburg is we have body cameras, and that's been a new development, and we haven't had time to analyze that footage yet. but we also have vehicle cameras. But again, I want to assure you that we had 6 Harrisburg police officers not in riot gear directing traffic on Front Street, surprised by a mass of hundreds of individuals pushing up against them. And then out of this group comes this woman who smashes the front window with the pole and punches the officer. She will be charged, and we will identify who she is. I don't have any information on that at this time, but we haven't yet had a chance to comprehensively review all the footage. I did, however, speak to the officers, and that is what happened. They felt that their lives at that moment were in danger, and it was appropriate to ask for backup. And rather than fight back, again, and I think you can see this in some of the footage which people have posted online, they simply surrounded the vehicle and very calmly, while being spit on and had insults thrown, and while the car is being broken up, peacefully and quietly tried to walk towards that intersection where they were eventually met by the Capitol Police. So that's the narrative of what happened. We will have charges, I'm sure, and video footage if we can get it here in the next couple of days. Yes, and let the commissioner speak to that. Maybe you can talk to why we haven't yet had a chance to review all this and what your day is, what it's been like over the past 24 hours too.
Sir, I would just like to say that we went to the protest to let people protest. We had riot gear, but it was inside the vehicle. If I would have sent my officers out on a mission without them being properly ready, that would make me a very smart person. That would make it seem like I don't care for the safety of my officers, who are all married and family people, and they want to go home safe like everybody else. The protective gear, as I like to call it, was in the police car. After the incident happened, that's when they went into their protective gear. There is video footage from Capitol that shows that we did not have on any protective gear until the incident happened. I don't know who this young lady is. I wasn't down there at the time. Hopefully we have her image on body cam, or we have cameras down that way, down on 2nd Street. Hopefully we can pick her image up. And if we can do a facial recognition, hopefully, and just maybe we're able, to shed some more light on that. When that does happen, we'll be more than happy to share the information with the media. We've been up for hours now. We're expecting more demonstrations in the city. My people are tired. But again, we will support the mission of a peaceful protest, but our mission is to protect life and property. So if anybody, wants to come here and wants to demonstrate peacefully, we are all for that. Thank you.
And I'll note that gear that was in the back of the car is still in the back of the car. It was still in the back of the car as of this afternoon. It never got taken out of the car. The 5 officers were outside of the car directing the traffic in their normal uniforms. The one officer stayed in the car, and they were being literally pushed by this sea of hundreds of people who descended upon this car. So it was a chaotic scene. It was a scary scene. But the violence started when this one individual struck and shattered the windshield with a spider crack going all the way through the windshield on this new Harrisburg police vehicle, Vehicle 219.
Okay, wonderful. Can you explain why or how you were able to verify that the protesters that came later in the day from out of state, not from the Harrisburg area?
Well, I can tell you that Commissioner Carter engaged with hundreds of these protesters over the course of the second half of the protest, and has personally told me that there were many, many faces that he didn't recognize and that were clearly from out of town. I think that there are reports of many Harrisburg residents who basically went to that rally, stayed for the first couple hours, and left, and were very surprised to find that the tenor had changed. Do you want to say anything further to that?
Yes.
Okay.
I had an opportunity to speak to some people that I did not recognize, and we talked back and forth. And I just asked them, yeah, you have the right to protest, but are you a Harrisburg resident? Where are you from? What part of the city did you grow up in? They couldn't answer their question. They would just walk away. All of the Harrisburg residents, that I had conversation with, they were trying to de-escalate the situation. And I'm sure that you've been seeing on CNN, that 80% of the people that were arrested weren't from the areas that were being protested and where the fires happened at. I'm not saying that some Harrisburg residents didn't get involved, but the people that I talked to that approached me that were in my face, a couple of them, I did not recognize them from the Harrisburg area, and nor could they explain to me, what area that they came from.
Commissioner Carter, do you think that the group that arrived around maybe 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, whatever the initial protest ended, was it the same group of people? Were more people added to it throughout the night? Did it change? Or was it kind of the same group of people that all arrived at once? And were they more aggressive toward you and your officers than the first group was?
Yeah, I'll just say, after about 3 o'clock, the original crowd absolutely started to disperse. People went home. The rally had been entirely peaceful up to that point. Then the crowd started to grow again with new individuals, and the tenor of the crowd changed. It was noticed by police officers along that initial route as they went by the Harrisburg Police Station on Walnut and turned on Front Street. And by the time they descended on the car that was directing traffic there at North and Front, it was angry and violent. And yes, I called it rioters because at that point they were smashing the window, hurling bricks, and carving into the car. So the tenor changed. Some of the participants changed. I'm not saying there weren't some individuals that were there for the whole thing, but the residents that I know in Harrisburg were part of the original protest, protested peacefully, and all of the officers from Harrisburg, I think, tried to de-escalate what happened. And so I think Harrisburg did very well, but I think there were other agendas there at work. There were clearly agendas, anarchist and other agendas there that were about inciting violence. And frankly, inciting violence has nothing to do with the dialogue that we need to have about how we can deal with racial disparities within our communities and within our criminal justice system. They were just there to be anti-establishment and anti-police. Yep. We'll just let Commissioner speak to that. Go ahead.
Sir, I just want to say that when the protest started, I was not there. When the protest first started, I was not there because we had information that it was going to be peaceful, there was going to be no problems. The organizers sent the information to us that it was going to be peaceful and no problems. I was at a baby shower actually, and I got a call, that violence is starting to happen in the city. So I can only say that from the time that I arrived arrived on scene, I can speak from that point forward. I don't know what happened before I got there. We're trying to gather information. We are fact-finding right now as to what took place. I myself, I did not see this young lady. I don't know what she looks like, but just reading a Penn Live article, the head of the NAACP said that when he was standing on the steps, a young lady approached him. He heard her talk, and she had on a backpack, and she talked about, let's go find police officers so we can brick. That's his direct words.
Thank you for that information, Commissioner. I appreciate it. I'm sorry that I talked over you. I just have two more quick questions. Mayor Pappenfuse, can you give us any more information about the Capitol Police arrest? And just for the both of you, if people that don't live in Harrisburg seem to cause the issues as you've explained them so far, how can you prepare for that better or maybe avoid that in the future? Is there anything you think you can do?
First of all, there's always a lot that we can learn from and improve upon. And we will definitely do the full debrief and talk about how we can handle things moving forward. But I think again and again and again, the Harrisburg Police Department tried to de-escalate a situation that some wanted to tip out of control. In terms of the arrest, I can only report the one arrest because that was seen by the Harrisburg Police. They were seen, the person was seen taken into custody and taken off by the Capitol Police. I can't give you any more information, but we can try and get that for you. And if anyone's curious about the condition of the Capitol Police officers, the one who was hit in the head with the brick is at home resting peacefully and feeling better, and the other who injured his hand was back on duty at the Capitol today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Valeria. You are unmuted now.
Hello, everyone. Commissioner Carter, you had said just a moment ago that you expected some of these protests to continue happening. Maybe not tonight, but maybe like during the week. What do you expect moving forward? Are you preparing police officers? Are you going to have any law enforcement tonight patrolling the area or around the downtown area in case protesters decide to stick around for longer? And Mayor Pappenfuse, are you preparing to announce probably like another curfew? Is that what has led you to decide? What led you to decide this yesterday? And would you be willing to do that again moving forward?
Okay, a number of questions there. So with regard to the curfew, that was issued at a very specific point in time when nightfall was descending and we still had a sizable group of a couple hundred protesters, and we needed to make sure that they were dispersed before nightfall hit and things could potentially escalate. That curfew only lasted last evening. It seemed to have worked actually very effectively the way it was intended. It was rescinded this morning, and I have no plans for another curfew at this time. But it is an option which the city has for the future. We did have another rally today on the Capitol steps. We were prepared and monitored very closely, and as of this moment, it was positive and peaceful, and did not require any additional police presence. So it really, I think, depends on the tenor of the rallies and what's planned for the future. But I will let Chief Carter, Commissioner Carter, address that part of the question.
Yes, I did make a comment about, other protests being planned for the area. I know that I believe one is being planned for this coming Wednesday, and on June the 8th we have another one protest coming. My take on it is that we'll be ready for the protest. Everybody is welcome in the city to protest because we're not going to interfere with people's constitutional rights. The only thing that I ask is that, you come into the city and respect our city, respect the citizens here, respect our property, and, just voice your concerns on the Capitol steps where everybody likes to go and talk. And after doing so, just leave peacefully. We would be out of sight and out of mind. If there's reason that we need to deploy any of our officers or we need to call in additional units, that will be done. I hope that it's not done for any reason if any of the organizers, want to reach out to me and talk to me so we can have an understanding, because I would like to know, who's in charge of these protests. I would like, some guarantee sort of, that it'll be a peaceful demonstration and that nobody is looking to cause any problems. But by all means, it's your constitutional rights to protest, just like it was Mr. Floyd's constitutional right, for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you.
We not only support the peaceful protests, but we understand the peaceful protests, and we think they're important. And we're all for that in the city of Harrisburg. But at a point yesterday, it turned from that to something quite different. And violence is never the answer and is never acceptable. And the police have to act accordingly, especially if they're going to protect public safety.
All right, I think as far as live questions, I don't see anyone else's hand up, but just a reminder, you can press *9, those who are calling in. If you have further questions, you can also use this chat feature or raise the hand feature. There were some questions that were submitted prior to the press conference. I believe we've gotten to most of them, but just to make sure, there's about 2 or 3 here that we can discuss before resuming back to the live questions. We had a question here about what is the dollar amount damaged to the cruisers?
So we don't know that yet. The cruisers not only had the front windshield, back windshield was knocked out, side windows were knocked out, lights were cracked, antennas were snapped off, graffiti was carved. I inspected 3 of the cars today. Sadly, one of the cars was one of our brand new cars that had really just gone into service here very, very recently. So we're looking at tens of thousands of dollars in damage to the vehicles, but the vehicles are still drivable. So the damage, to the extent that it occurred, is cosmetic.
One more question here that was submitted ahead of time. We just want to make sure that we're answering all the questions. We do have a question about a video showing police spraying the crowd with tear gas. Is this something they're allowed to do, and was this necessary?
I'm not familiar with the tear gas. If they're referring to pepper spray, which they might be, because that's what I saw. I think a lot of people saw that on Facebook. That was at the point when the Capitol Police came to the intersection at Forster in an effort to extricate the HPD officers that had gotten trapped by the crowd. They were the first to use the pepper spray at that time, and it was to disperse the crowd in order to safely extricate the Harrisburg police officers. At that time, the one cruiser had already been badly damaged, and additional damage was done after that point in the video.
Okay. We have one question here, 8192. Please go ahead.
Hi, yes, I'm not sure if this is for Mayor Pappenfuse or Commissioner Carter, but I know you had mentioned earlier that maybe facial recognition and some cameras downtown would be used in relation to finding the person that smashed the police car. Can you tell us how quickly you expect that investigation to either start or continue? What can people expect in terms of maybe some result from that investigation at this point in time? It seems like a pretty important part of this story.
Well, the investigation's already begun. We just haven't had a chance to fully examine a lot of the different footage that we have. As I said, we had body cameras, so that's going to be useful footage really for the relatively new for Harrisburg, so first time. I'm confident we're going to be able to identify the woman. I spoke to some of the officers that were involved in the incident, so I think we will be able to do that. So look for more to come and more to come out over the course of this week. We wanted to get the initial narrative out there because I think there's a lot of misinformation on social media and elsewhere, a lot of mistaken perception that somehow the police caused this by, instigated the violence when in fact the police were trying to defend against violence that came from the crowd. Yes, and Commissioner, go ahead. Yep.
Sir, in order for us to identify this young lady, we have to look through a lot of video footage. We also have to look at the Capitol video footage, and we have to locate someone, who can definitely say that this is the young lady who was on the Capitol steps talking about bricking police and the same lady that they saw bricking a car. We're not going to rush just to charge somebody. We're not going to rush just to appease people. We want to do things right, play things by the numbers, and if we can come up with an identification of this person, and then the final call will come from the DA's office if they feel we have enough evidence to lead to any charges being brought against this lady. Thank you.
Commissioner Carter, I'm sorry if this question's obtuse, but I just don't know a lot about the process that you all use, of course. But is there any reason she wasn't detained as soon as that incident happened? Was it the police wanted to get to safety, or did she flee? Move away too quickly? Can you walk us through that process, please?
So she smashes the front windshield of the police vehicle 219 with some sort of a pole, possibly a flag pole. She then goes up to an officer who and punches that officer. The officers are surrounded by hundreds of individuals pressing up against them. And at that point, she sort of disappears into the crowd, and the officers are focused on really the safety and getting out of that without further escalation and further harm. So there was no opportunity to arrest her at that moment. There wasn't even the physical space to do it. That was how cramped and difficult and chaotic the scene was. And as they are trying to escape the crowd and move forward, that's when the additional back windshield is broken, the side windshield, and everything else. So it's not just the woman. We mentioned the woman in part because that was the spark, the starting point of the violence, and it did encourage others to hurl bricks and to make carvings and do other things. So she should be charged, and if we can, we will.
Thank you for that information, Mayor. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
We have a question from Brett. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks so much. Just heard what you guys are saying, so wanted to make sure I get that right for my story as well. So the woman who hit the vehicle with the flagpole, she was able to get away from the scene, disappeared back into the crowd. So it actually does sound like that she was never detained. She was never arrested. We don't know who she is, and police are kind of reviewing footage to determine who she is and maybe press charges. But at this point, we don't know who she is.
That is absolutely correct. But I can tell you that the officers have very good visual. The one officer who was attacked by her, we will, I think, be able to track down who she is, but we haven't even had the time to review the video footage yet and to see what type of pictures we captured.
Okay, I believe that was the last question.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us and for your patience as we did this over Zoom. I also want to thank City Councilwoman Asha Green for joining us. She's the Public Safety Chair. I was in communication with her today, communication with President Wanda Williams yesterday as events unfolded. We consulted on issuing, President Williams and I consulted before I issued the curfew. And we're in this together, Harrisburg. Let's stick together, and we will make it through this.